Hello and welcome to the Rooted Together podcast, a podcast which aims to root you in Christ through his word together. I'm your host, Charles, and today we are in Genesis chapter 25 with an episode entitled Jacob. Well, we're entering the Jacob saga. We're leaving Abraham's story behind, a story of a man who followed God from his little town to a new land. A man that was promised that through his offspring, God would bless the world. A man who, when that promise was made, was old. A man who struggled with faithfulness. But a man that continued to trust in God even when it was hard and even when he didn't always do it well. And we see that God continually provided for Abraham. God continually sustained Abraham. And when Abraham was not faithful, God was. And now we leave that story behind. Abraham dies at the age of 175. And we'll look at that briefly. And then we enter into this next story. You know, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. What about Isaac? Well, the Bible kind of skips Isaac in a sense. Not much is written about him. We know the story of him and Abraham going up to the mountain. We know the story of him finding his wife, and he's literally at the very end of that story. And here he plays a fairly minor role. Jacob becomes the star. This is the Jacob saga, as it were. So it passes from Abraham briefly to Isaac and over to Jacob. And that's where we enter into in this chapter. So let's look at some stuff at the beginning here. But we want to look at the fact that in this chapter, we're going to see that favoritism and self-reliance are the enemy of success, are the enemy of the church, as it were. That favoritism doesn't help, and self-reliance often gets in the way of God. They are enemies of God. And yet our main characters, particularly Jacob here and Rebekah and Isaac, all of them favor one son over the other. And Jacob tries to obtain authority by manipulating and tricking his brother. One of two times he'll do that. Isaac and Jacob are the patriarchs. Yet Moses, as he's telling this story to Israel in the plains of Moab, Moses is displaying them all with all their faults. Notice Moses isn't playing up the patriarchs as these like heroes that never make mistakes. Abraham was fallible. Isaac is going to be shown to show favoritism numerous times throughout this saga. Jacob is not going to look like the hero patriarch you would want him to be. Very rarely in Jacob's life will he look like that. And yet that's often a mirror into our lives, right? We aren't the heroes of our story. We're often frustrated with why we continuously fail, why our flaws continue to stunt our spiritual growth. And we might be tempted to wonder, how can God possibly use me? Well, look at the story of Jacob. God used him and displays him in all his faults. And Moses is telling a very flawed people who have been in the wilderness for over 40 years. Why? Because they were flawed and because they questioned God and fought against God and didn't trust God. And God punished them through the consequences of letting them wander for 40 years to learn, to grow, and to learn to trust him. And they're about to enter the promised land that was promised to Abraham, and he's reminding them of these things, but he's displaying the patriarchs with all of their faults and saying, we are not a perfect people. We don't come from perfect patriarchs, but God is faithful, and that's going to be what drives this story and the stories of Jacob throughout his life. And by the way, that theme of favoritism plays into Jacob's life as well, and we'll see that with the story of Jacob and Joseph, but we're not there yet. In fact, this chapter doesn't start there. This chapter starts with Abraham giving everything he owned to Isaac. Now, he had other sons. He takes another wife, has many kids, but he gives everything to Isaac. Why? He's the son of promise. He's the son through which the blessing will come, and Abraham knows that even towards the end of his life. And in the end, he dies at 175 years old, and it says that he died content at a good old age. Abraham, despite his struggles with faithfulness, God was faithful, and God blessed him with a long life, and he died a happy old man, surrounded by children, which when you meet Abraham, he's an old man who is married to an old woman, and they have no kids. So what an ending for him. Then you get Ishmael's records in verses 12 through 18, and that's simply to say that God was faithful to bless Ishmael as well through the offspring that he had. But again, son of promise was Isaac, and now we zoom in on Isaac's descendants, who is going to be Jacob right now, and Esau. So verse 19, we are introduced to Jacob and Esau. When Isaac was 40 years old, he took his wife Rebekah. Now, for 20 years, she was childless. And again, there's that consistent theme of there's the patriarchs, the ones who God chooses to bless, often struggle with childlessness. Sarah did. Rebekah does. For 20 years, Isaac prays. And after 20 years, God blesses them. Isaac is 60 years old when Jacob and Esau are born. And they're wrestling in her womb, and she prays, God, what is going on inside my womb? Like, just, rocking and rolling going on. And God says, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples that will come from you, and they're going to be separated into 2 different nations. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And that's an important detail. God tells Rebekah, the older will serve the younger. He's saying, I have chosen the younger one, who is Jacob, as we see. So verse 24, when her time came to give birth, they were indeed twins. And the first one had a lot of hair. His name was Esau. The other brother came grasping Esau's heel. That's an important detail here. His name actually means hill grabber or trickster. And so he was named Jacob. Why? Because he was grabbing his brother's heel on the way out. And Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. Now they grow up, and and Esau becomes a hunter. Jacob stays at home, and here becomes our first problem. Verse 28, Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for wild game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Why is Moses telling us this detail? It's a recipe for disaster. The father loves this son, but the mother loves that son. There's a bit of a rivalry there. There's a bit of a problem there. That is not the model in the way it should work. And yet there it is. And so that's going to play into it here. So then verse 29 starts our first story of Jacob, who is going to trick his older brother. So we already see favoritisms playing into this. Favoritism will continue to play into this, and self-reliance. Jacob likely was told by Rebekah, you were chosen to rule over your brother. God told me that he will serve you, Jacob. Now, we don't know. We're not given that information, but we can kind of assume it by the fact Jacob is trying to take authority. He is trying to take that birthright, take that position, become the number one there to be served by his older brother. And how is he going to do that? He's younger. He's not as strong as his brother, and his father doesn't love him as much. Those are odds stacked against you if you're the one that's supposed to be the one chosen. You're younger. Your father doesn't love you as much as he loves the older son, because you don't do the same things that he enjoys. So verse 29, self-reliance kicks in, just like Abraham. It's the same pattern. I got to do this on my own. So once Jacob was cooking stew, and Esau came in from the field exhausted. Verse 30, he said to Jacob, let me eat some of the red stuff, because I am exhausted. And that is why he's also named Edom. That's a fun little detail Moses throws in. Jacob replied, first sell me your birthright. Well, that's an odd request, because, by the way, Jacob could have and should have very much said, sure, Esau, brother of mine, who I love, here's some stew, don't die. Instead, he's like, I'll sell you your birthright. I'll give you some stew, but first, sell me your birthright. Give that up. Give me that authority. Give me that number one position, and then I'll give you the stew, and you'll live. And for some unknown reason, Esau, I guess, who's tired, not thinking straight, goes, yeah, sure, whatever. I'm about to die. What good is a birthright to me? So he sells it to Jacob, the trickster. And Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore to Jacob and sold him his birthright. Then Jacob gave bread and lentil stew to Esau. He ate and drank and got up and went away. And then it says, and it ends with, so Esau despised his birthright. And that is 2 different thoughts on it. He could despise it because he sold it. Now he's bitter that he sold it. It could be he just didn't care about it. And so he's like, whatever, what is it to me? Either way you look at that, Jacob has manipulated his brother in order to get the birthright. He did not need to do that. because God had chosen Jacob. And if God has chosen Jacob, Jacob doesn't need to do anything but wait for God to make his move. Instead, Jacob is trying to make his own moves, to make his own power plays, to get the birthright and later the blessing. So we see him using self-reliance. I can do it myself. I can do it with any means necessary. But what we need to know as believers, and what Israel needed to know, was that as you get ready to possess the land, it's not by your strength. You don't need to trick. You don't need to do it by any means necessary. You do it by the means through which God will do it. And our patriarchs didn't do that well. And look what happened, because that's what we're going to see. There are consequences to each of these decisions that Jacob makes. And again, Moses uses those as a teaching tool to say there are consequences for trying to do it on your own instead of waiting and relying on God. So let's look at some takeaways here. Well, one, we see that God uses broken people like Abraham and like Jacob and like Isaac and Rebekah and Sarah with all of their faults. These stories tell us God uses broken people. He doesn't use perfect people. He uses us with all of our faults. And this chapter is a reminder that it is God who fulfills his purposes, and him who sustains his promises. It's not us. It's not what we do or how we do it. It's God alone. And here's the other thing we take away from this. God did not glory in Jacob's trick. Did God choose Jacob? Yes. Did God glory in the way that Jacob obtained the birthright? No. But he did glory in redeeming Jacob's story. You see, Jacob was redeemed later. He will be redeemed through God. God will redeem his broken actions. And God is glorified not through the tricking, not through the way that he obtained it, but through his redemption of a broken man. He's glorified when his power and his kindness and grace and sovereignty continue forward despite our sin. He's not glorified in our sin, but he's glorified in redeeming sinful people. Jacob, like Abraham, like us, is on a journey of faith and redemption and growth into Christ-likeness. So if you have failed God today, if you're like looking at your life going, I'm a failure, I've sinned, I let God down, I let people down, fall at his feet today. You know, God's not glorified in that sin, but he's glorified in redeeming you. He's glorified in bringing you out of that sin and into redemption and repentance. So plead to the one who overcomes sin and redeems the sinful, and he redeems the brokenness in us and makes it whole again through Christ. So as you look at the brokenness in this story, see the brokenness in yourself and see how God still uses and redeems that brokenness for his glory and his purposes. Well, thank you for joining me in Genesis chapter 25 and in the Rooted Together podcast. And if this has helped you or blessed you in any way, please share it with a friend. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.